The Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee has released a redacted version of its fifth and final report on Russian meddling in the 2016 election. The latest volume, nearly 1,000 pages, is the result of a 3.5-year bipartisan investigation. It finds, quote, the Russian government engaged in an aggressive, multifaceted effort to influence or attempt to influence the outcome of the 2016 presidential election.
So let's be clear, Republican Senate did an investigation and found that Russia did interfere in the election. And we all know that they interfered in the election in order to benefit Donald Trump. So you have to ask yourself, why did they want to interfere in our election in order to propel Donald Trump to the White House? And why was they so sure that Donald Trump would do their bidding?
When it comes to Trump and Russia,
possible ties between the Trump campaign and Russia.
It's easy to feel numb to the details.
George Papadopoulos,
Roger Stone, Cohen has been Paul Manafort, Don Jr.
And every time we hear Trump respond,
never any collusion, Russian collusion hoax, because there was no collusion.
But no matter how many times Trump says this, here's what we can't lose track of. We now have evidence of 3 major connections between the Trump campaign and Russia. We know that people working for Trump were willing to work with Russia to help him. And it's possible they broke the law to do so. Here's how we know. FBI Special Counsel Robert Mueller has tied several top Trump officials to Russia. So let's try to organize them. Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor, attended a meeting in Trump Tower with a Russian lawyer named Natalia Veselnitskaya, who promised documents and information from the Russian government that would reveal dirt on Hillary Clinton.
So you have to ask yourself, why did the Russians choose one side over the other? Why was they so clear that the Trump policies would benefit them?
So there was the Alpha Bank servers communicating with the Trump organization for some reason. What's that Russian bank got to do with anything? Then in the transition, there's Jared Kushner meeting with the head of VEB Bank for some reason. What's that Russian bank got to do with it? Then, not long after Trump got inaugurated, along comes another inexplicable, seemingly random intersection between Trump world and yet another Russian bank. The next one we learned about was, I think, the biggest Russian bank of all, a bank called Sberbank, which announced in March that they had hired new counsel to represent them in a big, complicated civil case that was filed in federal court in New York. They kind of surprised everybody. They made a lot of eyebrows arch in the legal news when they announced that they had chosen their new counsel for that long, complicated, and presumably very expensive case. And they said their new counsel was going to be Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Mark Kasowitz.
While Donald Trump was president, Donald Trump and a Russian bank that had been sanctioned by the government shared legal counsel. So they was able to communicate amongst each others and maintain attorney-client privilege. This is a form of deception that it can clearly be seen.
Is the Moscow deal. While Trump was complimenting Putin on the campaign trail,
If our country got along with Russia, that would be a great thing. What, he called me a genius? I'm going to disavow it? Are you crazy? And I hope he likes me.
Trump was also negotiating a real estate deal in Moscow. And the person who negotiated the deal for him was his personal lawyer, Michael Cohen. But here is the important detail. Cohen needed someone to grease the wheels. So he emailed Putin's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov. The deal didn't end up going through, but if it had, it would have made Trump a lot of money, which is why Cohen kept Trump updated on these negotiations. But now, Cohen is going to prison for, among other things, lying to Congress about Russia.
There's another one called VTB Bank. It is a very large Russian bank. It's not as big as Sberbank, but it's really big. VTB Bank is sanctioned by the US government because of Russia invading Crimea. This bank got sanctioned by the US government as punishment for Crimea because this bank is seen as the Russian government. It's an arm of the Russian government, and that's how the US government views them. In fact, if you go to VTB's website tonight, You go click on About VTB, and they will tell you in exact mathematical terms how they are controlled by the Russian government. The Russian government owns and controls 60.9% of VTB Bank. The majority shareholder of the VTB Bank is the Russian government, which owns 60.9% of the voting shares. What that means in plain English is that Putin runs VTB. Putin controls the bank and what it does and what it spends on. And today, we learned that up until last year, up until the middle of the presidential campaign, VTB Bank was lined up and committed to provide hundreds of millions of dollars in financing to build Trump Tower Moscow. The Russian government was going to do that deal. Actually, even without the knowledge that the financing for this deal was going to come from the Russian government, it's still a heck of a bombshell. Right? This is not some old deal that happened back in the past that people might have forgotten about. This is not something Trump worked on in the 90s and it fell apart. This was what he was working on during the campaign, after he announced that he was running for president, months into his presidential campaign. When he was full on running for president, he was trying to do this deal with the Russian government in Moscow. Quoting from Carol Lenig's story on this in the Washington Post, quote, "As the talks to build Trump Tower Moscow progressed, Trump voiced numerous supportive comments about Vladimir Putin on the campaign trail, setting himself apart from his Republican rivals for the nomination."
President Trump, please, you first. Just now, President Putin denied having anything to do with the election interference in 2016. Every U.S. intelligence agency has concluded that Russia did. My first question for you, sir, is who do you believe? My second question is, would you now, with the whole world watching, tell President Putin, would you denounce what happened in 2016, and would you warn him to never do it again?
All I can do is ask the question. My people came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be.
Trump is the Manchurian candidate. Let's be clear about this. Make no doubt about it. He was placed in power by the Russians. This video shows the evidence of why, the evidence that shows he was financially obligated to the Russians. His actions showed that he was submissive to Putin. And I point this out not because I'm concerned about the Ukrainian war. I am opposed to war. But you see how the Ukrainians, even in the midst of war, are treating Black people. But I point this out because this is why I say Black people need to have a complete mental, spiritual separation from Europeans. We have to go back to our original spiritual beliefs, which is, as far as I can date back, is the 42 laws of Ma'at, created dynasties that lasted over 6,000 years. No other spiritual belief system has had a dynasty that has lasted a fraction of that time that African civilizations have lasted in peace when they had collectively followed the 42 laws of